We're going to try to fix the Giants' offensive line. I have some suggestions and some ideas on how to do it. That's coming up next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I am Patricia Traina. So happy to have you with us here on this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Giants podcast. We're midway through the week. We're inching closer to the NFL Combine, which starts next week in Indianapolis. And we will be previewing the Combine, by the way, on this show. That show will probably be tomorrow. And we'll have everything you need to know ahead of the Combine. But on today's show, I'm going to take on a rather difficult task. Yeah, I thought about this. I still owe you guys and gals a mock draft. And I decided what I'm going to do with the mock draft. I'm probably going to wait till after the Combine for that. So this way we have a little bit more information as to what teams might be thinking. So that is coming, I promise you. But for today's show, how to fix the Giants' offensive line. I mean, can we all agree that the Giants' offensive line is the number one thing that this team needs to address? I think we can, right? So I came up with a 3-step plan, starting with who to keep and who to say goodbye to, then going to what they should do in free agency, and then finishing it off with what they should do in the draft. These are just my ideas. Some of you are probably not going to agree with them, and that's fine. Some of you might say, okay, that's a great idea, and that's fine as well. But this, to me, was an exercise that I really tried to give a lot of thought to and come up with a solution. Now, the disclaimer here with an exercise like this is I don't know what the coaching staff is planning to run. What I can probably safely assume, and yes, I know what they say about the word assume, is that the Giants are going to want good players, regardless of the position. So in going through this exercise, I tried to make sure that I accommodated for all that. So that said, let's jump in to step number 1, which is who stays and who goes. Now, for this part of the exercise, I went back and I looked at the offensive linemen that finished the 2021 season on the roster. So I'm, and when I say on the roster, I'm also including guys who were on injured reserve. So I have a list of guys that I don't want to see in a Giants uniform next year, and I have a list of guys that I think will be in a Giants uniform next year. And I will tell you why for each. But first, let me start off with the guys that I think are not going to be in a Giants uniform next year. We can start with Nate Solder, who played right tackle, and I think we can all agree that Nate Solder has seen better days. Matter of fact, there's been whispers that he might be planning to retire after, once everything settles down. So he could very well be retiring. Wes Martin, that was a guy I don't think we really saw, enough of to want to keep him. Will Hernandez, powerful guy, plays well in a phone booth, but where does he lack? His mental game lacks. And I don't know what it was with Will Hernandez, but when it came time to picking up stunts and all that good stuff, or where he had to hand guys off, he was just so far gone that, you just sat there and you just wondered what was going on with his game. So I think he's someone who's going to be able to benefit from a change in scenery. Now, who do I keep? Obviously, Andrew Thomas is a keeper. I have Ben Bredeson as a keeper. All right. Bredeson, I didn't think we saw enough of. He's a guy who can play both guard spots if you need him to, and I believe he can play some center as well. So I would keep him and let him compete. I would keep Corey Cunningham, who was like the jumbo tight end, extra tackle. I would let him come back and compete. Now, the one guy that I'm kind of iffy on, if I'm being honest with you, is center Billy Price. I don't think I want Billy Price starting if he is brought back. Billy Price is going to be a UFA. If he is brought back, I don't think I want him starting. But would I mind having him for depth, to compete for depth? Absolutely. I'd have no problem with that. Although, again, with Billy Price, that was a straight up player for player trade. So if they cut him, to me, not a big deal. All right. Now, I have question marks regarding Matt Peart, Nick Gates, and Shane Lemieux, the three guys who are injured. All right, where things stand. Now, Peart suffered an injury late last year. I don't think he's going to be ready for training camp. I don't think he's going to be ready to start the season. So I think we can kind of say he's going to land up on PUP. All right. Nick Gates had that broken leg. Now, I do think at some point Nick Gates is going to be back, but like Peart, I question as to whether or not Nick Gates is going to be ready for training camp, and I question if he's going to be ready for the start of the season. I believe all his surgeries that he needed are done, but that's not to say he won't need more down the line. So that's kind of a wait and see. Shane Lemieux, I think, has a possibility of being ready for training camp and for the season. And I think he will absolutely compete. So of those three, Lemieux for sure, I think, will be able to compete. And then there's another guy that doesn't get a lot of mention because he was injured early in training camp, and that's Kyle Murphy, a guy who was very versatile, could play interior, and I think some tackle too if you needed him to. Kind of a forgotten guy, but I suspect the Giants might be looking to move on from him. So, again, to recap, Andrew Thomas, I keep. Ben Bredesen for interior depth. Corey Cunningham, who could play tackle, I keep him. You're going to keep Peart, Gates, and Lemieux, but their injury status kind of makes it shaky. You're probably going to be 50-50 on Billy Price. Again, I would not mind re-signing him as long as it's not going to break the bank, which it shouldn't. Would I sign him necessarily to be my starter? The only way I would do that is if step 2 of my plan, which I'll tell you about in just a little bit, doesn't come to fruition. So that's who I would keep from the current group. Now, I know there's a couple of practice squad players in there who I unfortunately don't know a whole lot about to say whether or not I would keep them or whatnot, but I think we can all agree that the Giants are going to have to address the offensive line both in free agency and in the draft. And speaking of free agency, in the next step, step 2, I'm going to give you my theories and some names of guys that I think could be targeted by the Giants for their offensive line. That's coming up next. All right, Giant fans, we have more on today's Locked On Giants podcast. But first, Built Bar is the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, but without the calories and without the sugar. Most Built Bars contain around 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein, making it easy to stick in any diet plan. And they're available in nut and nut-free varieties with certain limited time offerings available year-round. Head on over to BuiltBar.com to see those limited time offerings and use our special promo code LOCKED15 to save 15% off your first order. Again, that's code LOCK15 for 15% off your first order at BuiltBar.com. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I am Patricia Traina, and I'm trying to come up with a plan to fix the Giants' offensive line. Now, on paper, this plan makes sense to me. Whether it actually makes sense to the coaches, that's another story. But look, we got to start somewhere, and everybody's got an opinion on how to fix the Giants' offensive line. So why can't I have one, right? I mean, why not? Could I be any worse than some of the other opinions out there? Probably not. But anyway, going to get to step 2 in just a minute. But first, just a reminder, we're going to have some previews of the NFL Combine. I'm going to have Joe DeLeon from the Believe, podcast network. He's going to be on with me on Thursday's show. And I booked Emery Hunt. I know a lot of you have asked me about Emery Hunt, when's he's going to come on. Emery's supposed to come on with me late Friday. So what I may do is I might kick my Friday show and kick that into Saturday, just so we have something, because it is going to be kind of like a combine preview. But more on that as we get a little closer. I'll let you know what we're going to do on that. So got to work with the timing here. And then, of course, I'm working on some other stuff for you, some surprises. As always, you know I have surprises for you guys and gals. So hope you will continue to tune in as we count down to the NFL Scouting Combine, which is next week in Indianapolis. Lots to talk about, I'm sure. So, all right, step 2 of my plan to fix the Giants' offensive line. Now, I'm going to start off speaking in broad terms here. Target a guy that can play all 3 interior spots. Now, there's a method to my madness here. When I say all 3 interior spots, I want a guy who has experience playing left guard, right guard, and center. Because right now, I have some question marks as to which of my injured guys I'm going to get back, what they're going to look like. Will I be able to pick up maybe day 2 or day 3 guys or undrafted free agents who can compete? Will I be able to pick up low-cost veterans in wave 2 and 3 of free agency? So I think if I'm spending premium dollars, I would want a guy who can compete, at any of the 3 interior positions, preferably at center. I would ideally want a guy who can play center for me. And the reason for that is I do believe Nick Gates is going to come back. But when he does come back, I want to see Nick Gates at guard. I don't want to see him at center. I have always believed that Gates is a better Gates is a better guard than he is at center. Just, seems more comfortable to me not having a guy over him, or not having, to snap the ball and then suddenly get his hands up. Just being able to fire out and get into his man. Just Gates to me looks like a better center from what I recall seeing from him. And a few years ago, I actually had him on the podcast, and I remember asking him at the time if he had a preference, guard or center. And he said he had told me on the podcast that he felt more comfortable being at guard. Because this way, you're in a phone booth, but you also don't have to worry about somebody coming in at you or whatnot. So anyway, who are some of the names we can maybe look at? I believe it was it ESPN? Someone suggested Chicago Bears offensive lineman James Daniels. Now, James Daniels can play both guard spots and center. He's a young guy. I think he's going to be 25 years old, 26 years old, something like that. So he might cost a little bit more. But see, here's the thing. I do think that the Giants are probably going to spend a little bit of what we would consider premium money on certain positions in free agency. They're going to have to. Quarterback is definitely going to be one position, and I think offensive line has to be the other. So James Daniel is a guy who is intriguing. Now, if we are looking at specifically a guy who is a center, a guy such as B.J. Finney, who played with Pittsburgh, could be maybe a little more reasonable as far as a price tag goes. Now, B.J. Finney is 30 years old, so I don't know that he would be the long-term answer. But look, you want to have a guy who's experienced at center, because it's a new offense. You want somebody who knows what they're doing in there. and you don't want to leave anything to chance. So BJ Finney was the guy that I looked at. A little bit about BJ Finney from Pro Football Focus. He's allowed 17 quarterback pressures and 659 pass block snaps and has a career 98.5 pass block efficiency rating. Not too bad. Not too bad at all. So, like I said, if you get a center, this paves the way to move Gates up back to guard when he is healthy. So, presumably, you plug the veteran in at center. You figure maybe Wes Martin and Shane Lemieux are amongst the two guys who are going to compete for a guard spot. Maybe you bring in another guard. Again, it could be a veteran. It could be, a draft pick that you get on the third day. But you bring somebody in to compete. And there was another guy, actually from Buffalo. And I'm just looking for his name real quick. Ike Boettinger, I think is how you pronounce it, an undrafted free agent that the Bills signed in 2018, who went on to become a starter. He has played both guard positions, probably more so left guard. And, look, I think we could probably all agree that Joe Shane, Brian Dable are going to want guys that they've worked with before from Buffalo, if whoever they can get. So Boettinger is somebody I would keep an eye on with both guards. Let's see. I mentioned BJ Finney, who is more of a center. So will the Giants double dip in free agency at offensive line? I'm not so sure that they will, but I am fairly certain. I would say there's a 99.9% chance that the Giants will devote free agency money to the offensive line, to at least one position on that line. They will also probably draft at that position. And if they don't, then my gosh, what are we doing here? And I'm going to talk about the draft in step 3 in just a moment. But I just wanted to kind of talk about, like I said, just blending in a couple of free agents with the guys they already have. From my perspective, the left guard is where you really want, I think, the guy to be solid because, you're talking the blind side there. And Andrew Thomas at left tackle was solid. You put in a solid left guard there and you shore up that blind side. And now maybe, I don't know, you think of moving Shane Lemieux over to the right side if he's healthy. You have a center in there, whether it be Daniels, whether it be Finney, whoever you might have. And then when Gates comes back, then you swap out at right guard whoever's in there for Gates. And I think that'll give you a solid, that should give you a solid interior, which is really what the Giants need. So, all right, what about the draft, which is step 3? Stick around and I'll let you know. All right, Giant fans, we have more coming up on today's program. But first, BetOnline.net is the #1 spot for all your sports betting needs. BetOnline.net is also the best spot for scores, podcasts, and news, whether it's basketball, hockey, boxing, UFC, plus all your favorite Vegas games. Head on over to the website today to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to segment 3 of the Locked On Giants podcast. I am Patricia Traina, and we're going to talk draft now. Where can the Giants get offensive line help in the draft? Now, there is a wide assumption that the offensive line help has to come in round 1. You know what, folks? It doesn't. It absolutely doesn't. Now, there are exceptions. If Evan Neal is still on the board, you grab him in round 1. If Ikem Ekwonu is still on the board, you grab him. But if those two guys are gone, if Kyle Hamilton is gone, Aiden Hutchinson is gone, where do you go if you're the Giants? Well, you maybe look at day 2 to get your offensive line help. There are some guys that would fall under the best player available that can also fit a need for the Giants that should be there in day 2 and maybe even in day 3, because this is a deep draft class for offensive linemen. That's the good news. All right, so who are some of the names that if they don't get an Ekwonu or an Evan Neal, who could the Giants look at in the draft? Let's take a look. Let's see. Bernhard Raimann would be one. Danielle Falele and Rasheed Walker. Those are some day 2 picks that maybe you can plug in at right tackle if you need them to. At center, you have Alec Lindstrom, you have Luke Fortner, and Cole Strange, a couple guys that we reviewed over on Giants Country. They could be potential centers if that's the route you want to go. And then if you're looking at guards, Zion Johnson, Darian Kennard are a couple names that come to mind. So maybe you can grab one of those guys. So really, you look at how the draft and free agency are going to set each other up. Actually, free agency will set up the draft. So if you're the Giants, do you, pick up guys in the second wave of free agency? I think you have to. But as far as the draft goes, I think if you don't come away with an offensive lineman in the first round, upon further review, that is, I don't think it's the end of the world. As long as you're getting obviously a really good player, whether it be, a pass rusher or a defensive back, maybe even a receiver. I could see that taking place in the first round. But look, a lot of Giant fans, I'm sure, are going to want to see the Giants get an offensive lineman in the first round. And I think the Giants would probably like that as well. So this way they're assured of it. They can move forward, not have to worry. But again, the offensive line class is very deep in this year's draft class. So if the Giants have to go to day 2 to pick up their offensive line help, not the end of the world. And in fact, this is such a deep class for offensive linemen that the Giants can maybe even get some depth pieces to develop in day 3 and maybe even as undrafted free agents. So, just keeping all that in mind, it wouldn't be so surprising, I think, if the Giants didn't draft an offensive lineman in the first round. Disappointing, maybe, because we all want to see an offensive lineman in here badly. But look, you can't reach. The Giants reached for Eric Flowers. That didn't work out very well. Some say that they reached for Andrew Thomas at number 4. I don't know about that, but, you just can't reach for a guy. And I don't think Joe Shane's going to do that. I'd really be surprised if they end up doing that. But anyway, the Giants offensive line, just to conclude this, I do think they're going to get it fixed, make it in a functional offensive line. Is it going to be, perfect the first year? No. Because again, there's different ways to go about this, and you've got some injured guys that you have to wait for them to come back. But that being said, if they could just get it functional and on the right track, then I think the Giants offense will be able to do what it needs to do in order to get to get its forward momentum going. So, all right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. Again, don't forget to check out tomorrow's show. Joe DeLeon is going to be with me. We're going to preview the combine. Emery Hunt is still to come on the show. He's scheduled for Friday, late Friday afternoon. So that show will probably kick into Saturday. And then all next week, combine coverage. So hope you will be on board with us. Until then, I am Patricia Traina. Thank you so much for making the Locked On Giants podcast your first listen of the day, or if you're watching us on YouTube, your first watch of the day. We will see you tomorrow.